What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Michael, and today on Fudge Muppet we're going to be diving straight into some vats of FEV and emerging into the wasteland as gigantic hulking beasts of unstoppable power. By being part of this video, we are all reborn as super mutants, at least in our heads. If it's not clear by now, we're here to discuss being a playable super mutant in the next single-player Fallout game. Call it Fallout 5 or call it something else, have it made by Obsidian or Bethesda, whatever you like, but the premise is still the same. What would it be like to be a super mutant in the next main Fallout game? Is it a whole lot of fun with sensational role-playing potential, or is it actually way too challenging and not even worth attempting? Well, in this video, I'm going to share my thoughts on all of it, going through all the possibilities as well as the challenges. After you've watched the video, I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below, but please do consider listening to everything I have to say, as I'm likely to bring up similar topics in the video to the ones floating around in your head. Also, let me know if you're subscribed and have the notifications bell turned on, but aren't getting our videos in your subscription box, because I've had a few people tell me that YouTube has been doing this to them, and I want to make sure you get all the content you've decided to sign up for. Alright, firstly, why would we want to be a super mutant if it could all be pulled off? And yes, I know to many of you that's like asking why would it be cool to be a superhero, and you're already utterly convinced it would be an awesome and fun playthrough experience. But for those who aren't convinced, let me tell you how cool it would be and what it could feel like. So playing as a super mutant would provide for an incredibly challenging and unique role-playing experience. As a mutant, you'd face similar social repercussions to ghouls, however much more enhanced. You don't look like a disgusting, rotting human, you look like a gigantic roid-munching green monster. More than just a kind of freak, you're almost considered an animal, like a beast, and a mutated one at that. People have a huge aversion towards you, and assuming you're not shot on sight, you're going to find yourself in some very interesting situations. Sure, in Fallout New Vegas you could take Lily with you, a nightkin, without her being shot on sight, but at least she looks somewhat less hostile as she's traveling with a human. A lone super mutant would attract a different sort of attention. You'll have to navigate through the main story in a very unique way, forging alliances creatively where possible, and getting the trust and respect of certain individuals in order to proceed forward. You'll find yourself in violent altercations that never happened in your human or even ghoul playthroughs, and have the opportunity to complete quests in ways you never thought were possible. There would not only be stat checks and speech checks, some of which may be made more difficult due to your mutant status, or easier if they involve intimidation, but there would also be special quest options. For example, to roleplay your heightened powers, particularly being incredibly big, heavy and powerful, perhaps in a certain quest you'd have the option to physically move a roadblock instead of having to find explosives to destroy it. Or in a mission similar to the crazy New Vegas quest, you can actually infiltrate a hostile super mutant compound, blending in until you're in a position to kill their troublesome leader, staging a rescue of an important contact for a faction you're helping. The downside to this is that you definitely wouldn't be able to play many double agent roles. Blending into an enemy faction's camp full of humans is kind of impossible. I think for any super mutants wanting to use stealth, you may find that because you're such a big character, implementing a lot of stealth boys into your playstyle is often necessary to succeed in some circumstances. Anyways, special speech checks may exist simply called super mutant or something like that, or also outcast even could be an additional check you can access, which playable ghouls could access too if they were a thing, where you can bond with other outcasts in general. Perhaps during the main quest there's a city you can actually defend from a raider attack, and so the mayor considers granting you access. First, he speaks with you over the intercom and makes you actually travel to the raiders' base and kill them all. So this is a quest you just won't experience as a human. He then, after all this effort, permits you entry into the city, telling the guards you have the same rights as anyone else inside. Many citizens are still terrified of you and may give you trouble, but otherwise the guards keep them in check, and it's now a city you can access. Perhaps there's a mistreated ghoul there at the bar you can actually bond with due to him also being an outcast, using the unique speech option. But then, perhaps halfway through the game storyline, one of the main xenophobic factions actually stages a takeover of the city while you're gone, and the fast travel icon disappears for you. Approaching the city from a distance, you'll find this ghoul limping towards you, fleeing the conflict. He tells his story that this faction invaded the city and tried to kill him specifically, but he fled through a secret underground system that's full of radiation. This allows you to, perhaps while working for a faction that is friendly to all outcasts, infiltrate the city from beneath. Emerge emerging into a powerful vantage spot where you begin killing these opposing faction members in a massive firefight. After succeeding, the once independent city is restored back to normal, with the faction you've been helping stationed there for extra defense and given some control. You now notice that all the citizens, even the ones who were scared of you or rude to you, are much friendlier, and always grateful to have you around. This is just one example of a unique quest arc that is only possible through being a super mutant, and due to befriending a ghoul, you get that extra option to help you defeat the invaders with a hidden entrance. Besides all the unique experiences, you have to remember that you're not just any social outcast, you're an incredibly superpowered one. As a mutant, the main bonuses would be combat oriented, many of your special stats would be enhanced, and while you're a bigger target, easier to hit and easier to see when trying to be sneaky, you're going to be super tough, strong, and have heightened senses. These gifts will make you an absolute powerhouse if you build your character correctly, and on top of this, you're going to have innate resistances to ensure that you're quite sturdy. Radiation and disease won't be a problem, and we think there could also be an innate armor rating or damage threshold to show how you can take a strike or a bullet better than an unarmored human can. You would have increased strength and endurance, being able to handle giant guns with ease if a strength requirement returned, and you'd be better able to smash and destroy foes in your path using melee attacks. Perhaps you can hit multiple enemies in one swipe, and you'd also be able to carry two-handed weapons in one hand, like a super sledge, attacking with impressive speeds. You'd also have more range on your melee attacks, and I can just imagine doing a forward sprinting power attack to be one of the most satisfying things, especially intimidating to foes. Perhaps if a perk list returned, there's some very specific perks you can't get, like those to flirt with humans and so on, but others you can get that are mutant specific, such as a perk that hypes up your intimidation factor and gives you a chance to make some enemies flee upon being struck by a power attack. There's a lot of potential if you want to get creative with it. Anyways, I'm sure if you weren't convinced before, you must be at least somewhat open and excited by the thought of playing as a mutant in the next single-player Fallout game, again under the assumption it's all possible. It just sounds like so much fun from both a role-playing and a combat perspective. It's also worth mentioning that super mutants were, in addition to ghouls, considered as playable options back when Fallout New Vegas was being dreamt up by Obsidian. They were considering giving players 3 races to pick from, but ultimately it didn't happen. Still, the fact that it really was being considered is quite exciting and shows that it's not necessarily a pipe dream. But before we go through specific challenges, how could all of this reflect in special stats and other mechanics? How would character creation work too? Well, we want extensive customization options for humans in the next Fallout game, but just for lore reasons, super mutant customization would be a bit more limited. You could slightly tweak things, such as how muscular you look, if you've got a blind eye or two, and so on. There can be some basic customization options, but I guess what I'm saying is we don't want the option to break the law and have super mutants with mohawks or be ridiculously skinny, or on the other hand be of behemoth proportions. Skin tone would also be able to be changed slightly, but not heaps. We don't want albino super mutants or even brighter yellow Vault 87 looking ones. We imagine you'll be a more green greyish color like a Mariposa Generation 1 mutant, as we envision a game with playable mutants to be set in the West. And we think this playthrough option only functions well if you are a Gen 1 mutant, which I'll elaborate on more later. Other small cosmetic things could include general head and face shape kind of stuff, enough customization to look unique from other mutants, but not enough to stray from the lore. From a stats perspective, there are many ways to pull off a playable super mutant setup, but here's a general idea we've come up with, and remember, it doesn't exactly have to be like this, and we'd be keen to hear your thoughts in the comments section. So we think your special stats could begin as 10 strength, 7 perception, 7 endurance, 3 charisma, 5 intelligence, 7 agility, and 5 luck. This may sound overpowered, but remember, you are a bigger target, so it will be easier for enemies to hit you from all directions, and it will be hard for you to use cover and not get hit, even if you crouch behind a regular-sized barricade. But yes, of course you're more powerful than a human character starting the game. That's the whole point. Also consider you're going to need these abilities when you arrive at a settlement, and their particularly xenophobic leader orders everyone to just start firing at you with everything they've got, explosives included. I'm not saying this will be your experience everywhere you travel, but in some places it may happen, and whether or not you want to fight or flee, you'll be naturally better off than a human who just decided to shoot up the entire place and turned the inhabitants on him by his own doing. It also creates an immersive atmosphere for when you approach a new place. How will they respond? You'll never be too sure. Some may leave you alone out of pure fear. Some may approach you with guns drawn until you calm them down, and yes, others may attack on sight. Perhaps if you approach some settlements without sprinting and without weapons drawn, the chances of altercation are much lower. This calm, steady approach may even be a necessity at many points in certain quests, and that's all part of the role-playing experience. Another cool thing could be having a human companion traveling with you to immediately make you look less hostile. This could help out in certain circumstances, and on that note, not every companion in the game would be accessible for a super mutant. Going back to the special stats, we thought 10 strength was pretty fair considering you're a super mutant, and consider that a character in Fallout 4 with 1 strength could get in power armor and bring their stat up to 10. I don't think that it's that overpowered. Getting perks, and if skills are a thing, skills, is what will ultimately make the most difference to melee damage anyway. You'll have good carry weight too, good weapon handling if it works like that, and obviously enhanced melee damage. Do note there are some weapons you can't use, particularly some hand-to-hand ones that might be too small for your big hands, such as brass knuckles. Speaking of power armor, you won't even be able to use it. Instead, you might be able to create some makeshift super mutant specific armor by strapping some power armor pieces on your body with leather straps and chains and so on. This could be some of the best mutant armor in the game, but you just won't be able to get into those high-tech suits. Not being able to use power armor suits further balances having increased endurance and natural resistances. 7 endurance will also help you sprint for a little longer, as action points will drain more slowly while doing so, and you should be traveling a little bit faster too due to longer legs, which is pretty cool to imagine. You also won't have easy access to the strongest or the coolest looking armors in the game. You just won't be able to wear most of the armors that you find, although on the bright side you'll have plenty of loot to sell and the capacity to carry it, so long as you go to a super mutant friendly vendor. There should be plenty of those eventually. There will be certain sets of mutant armor you can find and create using certain special recipes, but you're just going to have to deal with a bit less variety than humans and ghouls. Having a higher perception also isn't super overpowered, as the stat just isn't particularly powerful, but we want it to be able to help you detect enemies on the compass even before they come into view, like it used to in previous games. This could help you stay sharp if there's someone with ill intent on the horizon. Keep in mind that 7 perception is also the level given to the base super mutant of Fallout 4. Intelligence is kept at a flat 5. Now, while some Gen 1 super mutants became more intelligent, others did not, and many became slightly less intelligent than their human form. Due to this, you'll be able to set your intelligence higher or lower than average depending on what kind of character you want to make. Agility is the final stat starting above 5 at 7, and this will give you more action points to use in VATS. It may also technically buff your sneaking, however being a mutant you'll be easier to spot, so you're still going to have a harder time than a human at stealth. In regards to your Pip-Boy, we imagine it attached somewhere, like perhaps on your waist, because it wouldn't fit on your big forearm, and when you activate it you just pick it up from your side. The luck stat will be left at 5 because we don't think it should really be affected by anything. Being a super mutant, you might run into some bad situations, but it's not really a luck thing as much as it's the raw circumstance of you being a mutant. However, the charisma stat would probably have to be drawn down to 3. Now, this isn't necessarily because you're bad at speaking or have a boring low kind of energy. It's simply to represent that you're a super mutant and you'll have a hard time convincing people to trust you. You're just so different and alien to a human character, so they're going to find it harder to relate to you or to like you on a base level. That's not to say no one will like you, but usually you're not going to have a silver tongue and charming mannerisms unless you work hard at it. We would still like it to be possible to work on your charisma as a mutant, perhaps making you witty and able to disarm tense situations quickly and so on. But even as the slickest mutant in the game, it's part of the role-playing that you'll never be able to reach the max potential of the master smooth-talking human character. With these special stats to start the game, we'd also want to use the system where you then have 5 special points to allocate, and you can take points away from other stats too. However, we'd limit you to only being able to take away 4 points from any given stat, so if you want to take your perception down to 3, you can, but it would likely be to roleplay being blind or permanently affected in some kind of negative way. We'd also put a hard cap of 15 on some of those enhanced skills, so strength maxed would be 15. Do note that this doesn't mean that it's easy to just get 15 in all of your enhanced stats and run around as a god. It would still be difficult to advance your stats if we went with the New Vegas system, which we prefer, but obviously Fallout 4's system changes things a bit. But if you were to focus hard on one thing, yes, you could get 15 in it. And yes, you could put all the special points into strength and start with 15. It really just depends what kind of backstory you want to roleplay. Maybe you're a particularly strong mutant, a kind of crippled one, or a really tough one for whatever reason you may have. In terms of a base armor rating and resistances, it's hard to say okay, and it depends on what system is used. Honestly, like the special stats, we don't really mind how it's precisely done, so long as it appears to make good sense in the lore and isn't too overpowered. If damage threshold was used like in New Vegas, you could give mutants a base DT of 15. Lily and Marcus both have this, despite her wearing clothes and him some armor pieces. Then again, that mutant living in Westside, known as Mean Son of a Bitch, has a DT of 0, so it's all a bit random. You could look at the energy and damage resistance of mutants in Fallout 4, but this all changes depending on their rank, as in Super Mutant Enforcer, Master, and so on. Whatever the case may be, perhaps it could just function as if a mutant's skin is tough, like a human wearing leather armor, although if Fallout 4 has established that mutants have higher ballistic damage resistance and are weaker to energy weapons, you could tilt the stats to reflect that. My whole point is just that mutants would be tougher, and this should be shown, but it shouldn't be like their bare skin is made of heavy combat armor buffed with a polymer mod upgrade. I hope now you've got a bit more of an understanding of how super mutants could be implemented from a gameplay perspective. It's a bit of a balancing act of showing how they're naturally powerful and gifted without giving them 30 strength or other stats too game-breaking like that, even if you may think at first that it would make sense given their muscular appearance. But now let's talk about the challenges, and the reason I've left this until the end is because I've actually crossed out a few of them by explaining a theoretical setup, how it could work, and covering various other considerations. Some of these challenges I've mentioned already, but I'd like to expand on them a bit more. So first and foremost, we have the location of the game and how it all begins. As mentioned, we think the storyline would only fit well for Gen 1 mutants, that is, the ones who haven't lost their minds completely. This is because Gen 2 super mutants are low intelligence, would have vastly limited dialogue options, and don't really integrate into society, being highly aggressive. Potentially, you could shoehorn some lore to rationalize an East Coast setting with Institute super mutants or something like that, but we think it would be a lot smoother if things were set in the West, and you're playing as a Gen 1 mutant created in the Mariposa military base by the Master. This isn't a challenge as much as it is a restriction, but it's a restriction we'd happily have. There's so much lore in the West, and if you've been watching our channel for a while, you'll know that we'd be big fans of setting a new game there. The game could be set in Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, or even Wyoming, which we've dreamt up in our ideal Fallout Wyoming video. There's plenty going on with the factions from New Vegas too, such as Caesar's Legion, still left to explore, and you could make a very cool game after the ending of Fallout New Vegas. Anyway, the game would have to be designed in a way where you can start out as a mutant or a human, and it makes sense. You could do it Dragon Age Origins style, where you actually have a completely separate beginning setup depending on who you choose to play. However, we think it's still easily possible to have a setup that's similar but not exactly the same for everyone. In our Fallout Wyoming video, we explained how we prefer a blank slate sort of beginning, where you're not on some mission involving finding your family. Stealing a page from Elder Scrolls, you could start off as a prisoner in a Raiders Cave hideout north of a central trading post, held by a gang of raiders who have managed to tie you up in chains. As a human, you are simply a trophy who they will delight in killing. As a mutant, it could be a similar story, or perhaps they plan to forcibly make you their slave, a useful though dangerous asset in the wasteland. How you were captured is a mystery at the moment, but as a mutant, perhaps you hear one of the raiders mention how they purchased you 2 days ago from the trading post nearby in some sort of secret underground black market. Regardless of who you are, the raider leader will mention he wants one of his men to go to the trading post to collect a valuable order coming in. The exact specifics of how you found yourself in this situation aren't known, but before you know it, a battle breaks out at the cave entrance. It's not Alduin saving the day, of course, but perhaps a competing raider gang, or one of the main story factions stages an attack. As a human, the raiders may get killed and you get rescued. As a mutant, perhaps the raiders release you in a last-ditch effort to cause chaos, and you're forced to flee. As a human, you could have this new faction to talk to, and after mentioning one of the raiders had a valuable order coming in, they will direct you to the nearby trading post to get it. As a mutant, you might be directed to loot the delivery pickup orders from the raider's corpse as you're fleeing, and then be forced to run out a back entrance with a new objective to investigate the trading post. In both cases, you wind up getting the package, which is in fact a Pip-Boy, and then the world is your oyster. Now, this is just one example of many possibilities, and really you might be surprised at how much you could just changed little things to make a mutant work even in previous games. For example, it wouldn't make sense for Doc Mitchell to find a super mutant in New Vegas and decide to patch them up. However, you could simply add something to his backstory about working in Jacobstown with the folk there and the mutants, and it makes more sense. He still puts you in restraints before saving your life to make sure you're okay when you regain consciousness, but he's not scared of you. That said, the rest of Good Springs would be. Maybe you progress all the missions through talking to Sunny Smiles, as she seems like one of the only people open enough to talk to you. She'd speak on behalf of others and tells you of the Powder Ganger situation, and the people of the town will cautiously accept your help, as Doc Mitchell and Sunny Smiles are both vouching for you, and they desperately need all the support they can muster. Alternatively, Joe Cobbs of the Powder Gangers might treat you like a brainless mutant and say something like, "Hey, you big green freak, you want to help us spill some blood? You like blood, don't you?" And you have the option to play along like a brainless killer and help them, or respond intelligently to his surprise, but also help them. It's unconventional, but regardless, they'd feel pretty badass having a mutant help them raid the town. A similar thing could happen at Prim, where instead of entering the casino, you may be able to speak through an intercom from outside and get the option of helping to rescue Deputy Beagle before they let you in. Doing this makes those inside the casino more trusting of you when you come in and it's revealed you're a mutant, and the deputy won't exactly complain that a mutant is rescuing him. It's better than being captured by raiders. Of course, there's small considerations, but you could fix a lot of them with little changes. Perhaps at Nipton, the Legion just attacks you on sight, and that's part of the experience. The Legion could refuse to have anything to do with you. Anyways, I'm not going to go through the entire game and alter it for a mutant, but I think you get my point. Sure, places like the Strip and so on could be hard to get into, but I'm sure you could find a way to earn your way in somehow. Maybe under orders of House, you're finally allowed into the Strip, and the Securitrons will attack anyone who tries to harm you. The people of the Strip might not like it, and most would keep their distance, but too bad for them. Earlier, I mentioned the super mutant known as Mean Son of a Bitch, and we know he's not shot on sight hanging out in Westside. He defends the people there from attackers and even does odd jobs for farmers. It goes to show an example of a mutant fitting in as best as they can and contributing to a post-apocalyptic society. People have seen non-hostile mutants around the place, as rare as they are. But I'm not here to argue that it's super simple to make New Vegas perfectly smooth for mutant playthroughs, but I am saying that things aren't as restrictive as they might feel upon first consideration, and you don't have to ruin a game or make it overly contrived to make mutants possible if you execute things properly and get creative enough. Though yes, I realize with Bethesda making the game, that could be a big if. Another challenge is just having all of the NPCs record different voice lines for encountering a super mutant. Everyone would treat you differently, and you'd have to have lots of different examples to make things feel real. Perhaps most civilians are not comfortable talking to you. Maybe if you walk up to them, they just run a certain distance away. Maybe some have dialogue lines like, "Please leave me alone," or "Get away from me, you monster." However, hearing these same lines over and over again would get stale pretty fast. The only way I see to address this is just to provide a huge amount of NPC civilian responses and mix them up really well. If they stay silent and just move away from you, it works well enough though. And of course, this is mostly just for non-important NPCs anyway, though a drunk NCR officer, just as an example, might not keep dancing happily if a mutant comes up to them. Maybe they'll panic and shoot you, or just freak out and run. Or maybe it's funny because they start dancing really close to you. Who knows? That's part of the fun of the playthrough, but a difficulty of setting it all up in its own right. So yeah, there's a lot of things to consider with NPCs, especially essential ones who would just treat you differently, which makes recording voice lines more strenuous. Another challenge I've mentioned is being shot on sight and how that would be pulled off. There could be some generic townships or roaming stragglers that may shoot you on sight. Some may be set in stone and some might be random. Some might only shoot you if you have your weapon drawn, and others if you just get too close to them. Perhaps a cool option could be a yield feature. You know how if the guards or certain NPCs are attacking you in Elder Scrolls games, you can yield and put your weapon away and they may stop? Well, imagine a feature where if you have your weapon and arms down and press a yield button, perhaps just holding down the activate key, the mutant will say something along the lines of, "Stop, I mean you no harm." This may guarantee some hostile NPCs calm down if they're somewhat important, or will cause complications if they stay as hostiles. It may have a chance to calm down the hostile NPC if they're inconsequential, and it might be impossible to calm down some if they're programmed to be super anti-mutant. Of course, the challenge here is making side quests and story missions available to mutants. Obviously, as I've said, 100% of the content isn't going to be available for mutants, but we'd still want most quests to be possible given the right approach. challenge. Reasons quests might not be possible include that the quest giver is incredibly scared or xenophobic, or that they require you to do something that only a human can do. In rare instances like this, it's just too bad, so sad. You picked the mutant playthrough, you don't get to do everything. You can't join every faction, you can't infiltrate every group or organization, and some people just won't like you. But overall, I think there wouldn't be too drastic of a limitation on content, so long as you learn to approach things correctly, and they make sure that essential NPCs, as they like to call them, can be convinced to help you, or at least provide a method by which your quest can continue onwards, even if that involves killing someone, threatening someone, helping someone else, or doing extra side quests to gain approval. What would be really cool is a main faction like one we theorized in that Ideal Wyoming video called the Pariahs. This is an entire faction of outcasts, mutants, ghouls, all kinds of folk considered different, who seek a better life together. Another challenge you may be thinking about is actually the size of a super mutant and how they'd fit in all the doors and other entrances and exit areas. Well, if you've played New Vegas, you'll know that there's the Nightkin companion Lily, who you can take all around the wasteland with you, who goes through doors and entrances pretty easily. However, to test things even further, what better way than to go around the map of New Vegas, visiting all the narrow areas and spawning in super mutant masters using console commands and having them tear apart the places with their miniguns and incinerators. Anyways, you'll notice that while the doors may look small from far away, if you actually go and stand next to them, they're pretty big, and mutants seem to be the perfect height to just walk through them. There weren't really urban environments that seemed unfitting for mutants in New Vegas. Something similar would obviously have to be implemented into a future Fallout game if they were to have playable super mutants. The only challenge I can see are those entrances that are still without a doubt too small. Like, some of the farmhouses in New Vegas have smaller doors which take you through a loading screen, but if the doors did just swing open, as there's likely to be fewer loading screens and a more open world in any future Fallout game, then clipping might become an issue. Realistically, mutants would just bend down and twist their way into cramped entrances, but it's not really realistic to have developers use all of these unique entrance animations every time you want to go somewhere tight. So overall door size is just a consideration that developers would have to keep in mind, but it's probably not as big of a problem as you might think based on previous games. I also wouldn't be opposed to super mutants not being able to access certain areas. For example, if there's a tiny grate or manhole you have to go through as a human in a mission, perhaps the only option as a mutant in this mission is just going through a bigger and more obvious entrance, losing the stealthy surprise advantage a human may be able to obtain. Again, it's just part of the role-playing, but as long as the doors are sizable enough, like in New Vegas, everything should be sweet. Aid items and consumables are also an area that's worth mentioning. We don't really know how certain medicines would affect mutants, but honestly, would fans really mind if they worked in the same way? It could make sense. Or maybe a drawback is that consumables like food, alcohol, and chems are only half as potent due to your massive weight, so you could do something along the lines of halving all the positives and negative effects. This would mean that you may need to stack different consumables together to get a desired effect, and may even slightly balance out the fact that mutants are just naturally tougher characters anyway. Some items like Stealth Boys would just work exactly the same, and perhaps certain chems might too. Perhaps it would be interesting if some chems, for whatever reason, were even more impactful on super mutants, such as mentats. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of our discussion on playable super mutants, how they could be implemented into a new Fallout game, how absolutely sensational it could be, but also the challenges posed, which might make some areas quite tricky. What do you think of playable super mutants? I think that it's definitely a feature that could be implemented well in theory. However, whether or not Bethesda or another game developer would actually bother to put in the effort to pull it off, let alone pull it off correctly, is a whole other story. Personally, I think the chances we see this in any future single-player title are on the lower side, but I would love to be surprised, and I would love for it to be a truly amazing role-playing experience. Social media links are in the description below for those interested. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, it really helps. My name is Michael, and I look forward to nerding out with you again very soon.